Jeff Livingston is the historian with the Oahu Railway Society. His talk to EAH centered on the early start and development of the Oahu Railway by Benjamin Dillingham. About 1888, Benjamin Dillingham obtained a lease on lands from James Campbell. Dillingham realized Oahu needed transportation, that is a train, for the development of the emerging sugar industry and his newly leased lands. Dillingham supported the Hawaiian royalty and obtained an exclusive charter to develop and operate a steam railway from the Hawaii legislature in 1888. In the next year, he built the first segment of the Oahu Railway from Honolulu to Pearl City and his housing development. In the following years, the railway was extended to the North Shore and Central Oahu. Jeff provided the historical details and stories on the railway development and on the steam engines and the first-class to third-class passenger cars. Please share your comments with EH. Mahalo.
All right, Kanan, can you start our meeting? This is the first time
Sure
we've
thing.
from a car.
I'm on the runway at the Lihui Airport. So, welcome everybody to Friday. What is today's date? Friday, August 18th. Engineers and Architects. My name is Kanan Sean. I'm the president, also the general manager for Hawaii Geophysical Services. Mac, you want to start us with some humor?
Humor today comes from Lori Lloyd. She fired me a couple of emails reflecting the beauty of the Victorian insult, and then commenting that, today's insults don't class at all, just a few four-letter words. I think the one that we're probably most familiar with is George Bernard Shaw sending Winston Churchill, they must have had a contest, said, Bernard Shaw sends, I am enclosing 2 tickets for the first night of my new play. Bring a friend if you have one. Of course, Churchill kept being outdone. He answered, cannot possibly attend first night. I will attend the second, if there is one. That's the humor.
Very good. Thanks, Mac.
Turn it over to Aaron.
I've got first a couple of announcements for September speakers. We've got Ewa Paula presenting on the 8th, and we have continuing with the rail theme, the CEO of HART on September 22nd. This is Jeff Livingston. He is the Hawaii Railway Society historian, his official function there. I've been working with him on a restoration project, so that's how we made the connection. As far as his background, I don't know too much, so he could probably fill in the blanks here, but I know he has experience doing submarine work in the Navy, as well as being involved with electrical contractor in his day job. So feel free to elaborate if you want, Jeff, but take it away.
So today we're going to speak a little bit about the Oahu Railway and Land Company. And originally I was asked just to give an overview of it, but without Aaron's knowledge, I changed it. And I'm going to concentrate primarily on some of the early years of the railroad. It's particularly appropriate now that we have this new rail system that opened on the 30th of June this year, which also marked, I think it was the 80th anniversary of the last Honolulu Rapid Transit trolley car that ran in Honolulu. So there's a connection there. And the other connection, of course, is it virtually follows the first route of the Oahu Railway and Land Company. Okay, this map shows roughly the entire area of the ORNL, starting in Honolulu. It wound its way up around the locks, and initially all the way up around Kaena Point to Kahuku. In 1904, the Wahiawa branch was constructed, and then in 1909, the Liliuokalani branch to Schofield Barracks. Dillingham did not set out to build a railroad. Dillingham set out to colonize Oahu. Population center was Honolulu. You had a few people out on the coast, and the only plantation was in Waianae. That was the sugar plantation there. To get sugar out of Waianae, you had to load it in a cart, take it to the beach, put it in a boat, take it through the surf, put it on board a schooner, take it to Honolulu, and then offload it. It took about a day if you were going to ride a horse between Honolulu and Waianae, or perhaps longer. So Dillingham wanted to open up this entire area for colonization. In doing so, he acquired a lease of 600,000 acres of James Campbell's land. He realized he needed a railroad to make any progress at all. So the first section of the railroad planned was from Honolulu to Pearl. Now Naval Station Pearl Harbor, as shown on the map, it was known as Pearl Lagoon. In 1887, Dillingham got essentially a exclusive charter to build this railroad. He promised his friends he would give them a ride on his next birthday, because he actually got the charter on his birthday. Because there was no freight involved at this point, Dillingham had to create a passenger railroad. So he ordered a number of pieces of equipment, passenger cars, first class, second class, combination car, passenger baggage, and third class cars from Carter Brothers in California. He ordered 2 locomotives from the Baldwin Locomotives Works in Philadelphia. The 1-year point came, he wanted to give his friends a ride like he promised. He had no locomotive. He had a few third-class passenger cars. This locomotive, which in this photograph, you can't see it, but underneath the 6, it says Kauila. Kauila 6 was purchased by the Hawaiian government for use at the Mo'iliili quarry. Now, we don't know for certain, but either the flanges were too deep because the rail was so light out there, or it was the wrong gauge. But in any case, the government could not use it. It was sitting on the pier in Honolulu, still in its crate, and Dillingham bought it. So this was actually his personal locomotive. It pushed the first ORL passenger train from the Honolulu Depot about 1 mile up toward the rice mill. At which point, one of the flues had a problem. It spewed black sooty water up in the air, and all the fine folks in the car in their white suits wound up looking like Dalmatians. But this locomotive is still in existence, and it's at the Hawaiian Railway Society. In fact, we just put a rebuilt cab on her, and the stack is totally different now. We haven't decided how we're going to handle that yet.
You say that was a pusher.
No, it would pull also, but in this particular case, it pushed the 2 passenger cars. And then because it broke down, they had to take the tramway back. Okay, the following year, they built the initial depot. This was the first depot at Honolulu, and the 2 locomotives had arrived. This one is Leahi, and there's one to the right, that's Kaala. And you can see the passenger cars, they were very mainland looking cars. Now these cars are narrow gauge, 3 feet, whereas on the mainland, they're 4 feet, 8.5 inches. So even though they're smaller, it towers over Leahi. Kaala does a little better in proportion, but you can imagine just how small these locomotives actually were. That's the fine citizenry of Honolulu. Okay. Initially, Dillingham built to the what we now address as the Pearl City Peninsula. And he had a number of lots there that he immediately started selling. He had no freight yet. So he's moving people from Honolulu out to Pearl. One for the the novelty of riding a railroad, since this is the first commercial line on Oahu. There were already plantation lines in existence. But then he built a dance pavilion, a recreation area, so that he could haul people on weekends and in the evenings out and get them out of Honolulu, because it was actually cooler. You can't tell these days, but back then I guess it was cooler at Pearl Lagoon. See, this is a little better photograph. This car was built by Carter Brothers from California. The lettering up here is drop shaded, and of course the number down here is all fancied up, as well as all the gild work there. These cars rivaled anything on the mainland. The railroad was kept in absolute top shape all the time. And it was essentially a water level route, and became known as the Pensy of the Pacific. Now, those cars are very, very plush. We're going to get to a third class car here in a minute. The cars were very plush that he got from Carter. You can see the overhead liners. Instead of just being wood, this was all essentially wallpaper printed on heavy canvas. Plush seats that would flip over. Very, very highly decorative.
No idea who he is.
No, I wish we did. Unfortunately, a lot of the names and everything else are long lost. In fact, a lot of these pictures we dug out of Bishop Museum, and they didn't even know they had them. We spent probably between 5 and 7 years going through the remaining primary documentation of the ORNL and photographs. So we've got a lot more information than we used to, and there's still an ungodly amount we don't know. And then the initial yard, the track right here went down to the wharf. So Dillingham needed access to the harbor so he could move freight from and to schooners. He tried to go through the government, and it hasn't changed from then to now. Delay, can't make a decision. So there was a section that was not under government control. He bought it, and he built a wharf, a railroad wharf, ran the trains all the way down to the end, and was able to move equipment and eventually sugar and other products directly from the railroad onto the ships. Eventually it developed into various warehouses, automatic sugar conveyor belts to load ships. It was quite an extensive operation. And of course, at some point, the government kicked it into gear and said, no, you can't do that anymore. And you can imagine the fight that ensued. The ORNL lost eventually. Yeah, this is the initial yard in downtown Honolulu. Right over here, you can see some structures. That's actually the top of a third-class car. The depot is right here. Got some locomotives, trains lined up there. This was the first shop. These were the seats that went inside this body on the third-class car. But you should notice the stub switch.
The what?
The stub switch.
Stub switch right here?
Yeah. This photograph is circa 1900. So that's just the same building, the opposite end. Okay, the area that we saw there with the depot had a lot of water around it. Dillingham was actually the contractor that built the railroad. To build the railroad, he bought 2 locomotives. This is one of them. It was secondhand, narrow gauge, and he bought the steam shovel behind it. All those dump cars came from Carter Brothers, and there's very clear indication that Carter never actually got fully paid for them. It was a contentious litigation for some time. But this is right by Pualoa Road in Honolulu, and this is where they got the rock and the fill to fill in the entire depot area so that they could build a larger yard and the engine facilities and the shop facilities, and that continued to grow over time. This locomotive did not become the property of the ORNL until somewhere around 1912 or 13, when it was finally absorbed into the ORNL. In this particular car, this Dillingham bought for himself. It was his personal car. It's a parlor car. It is extremely ornate, and when he ordered it, it came with a set of royal blue curtains embroidered with the Hawaiian coat of arms. Now, we know that Kalakaua rode on the ORNL. We do not know whether it was in this car or not. We do know that Queen Liliuokalani did ride in this car. Unfortunately, the Pearl was modified later in its life into a observation car and numbered 48. After the ORNL abandoned its main line in 1947, it was given to the Hibiscus and Halconia Short Line Railway that was operating out of Kahuku. And they'd run little fan trips for themselves and other people using a Kahuku locomotive. When Kahuku stopped using the railroad, they told them, hey, you got to get these out of here. They didn't have the money to move them, and this car wound up being burned in Kahuku in 1949. This is the second locomotive that Dillingham purchased for the construction. That's the Goliath. It too became ORNL property later in life, but right behind it, this is one of the original third-class Carter passenger cars. You can compare that car to the very plush cars in it. And unfortunately, at the time, the way it was written is that the third-class cars were for Chinese and natives. It's interesting going through the documentation of how nationality played into how everything operated. For instance, in a pay report, all of the Chinese employees had names. All the Japanese employees had numbers. Jap 1, Jap 2, Jap 3, Jap 4. They inquired about an order from the J.G. Brill Company in Philadelphia for some passenger cars and specified that they were to have wooden seats because, nothing fancy, because they were meant for natives and foreigners. Okay, the depot again in Leahi. And you can also see that the land is being filled in a little more as we go. And you can see the size difference between the car and the locomotive there. Each of those cars held 46 passengers. I'll probably get too many depot pictures in here, but I really like them. This is about 1903, 1904. Okay, Kaala. This is the Pearl City Station. So at this point, this is where people were buying lots. Dillingham made them a deal. It was 10 cents to get from Pearl City to Honolulu and Honolulu to Pearl City, if you owned a lot. And if you bought a lot and you want to build, he would haul all of your building materials for free. Eventually, from the Pearl City Station here, they built a 1-mile branch line so that the train service for the residents of the Pearl City Peninsula was almost door to door. They built a little locomotive, which unfortunately, there's one photo of it, but I can't prove it's that locomotive. I can prove what it's not, but I can't prove what it is. But they eventually wound up running a Ford Model TT truck between the Pearl City Station and the end of the Pearl City Peninsula. That's going to be Aaron's next project. Dillingham was a promoter of Ewa Mill. He needed freight. His passenger hauling was starting to drop off. Everybody had come out, but now he had another reason. We've got the construction of the Ewa Mill. Now, this was on land that he had leased from Campbell and then leased to the construction and to the plantation. So he was subleasing everything he possibly could. People would come out to see it on weekends. He would run evening charters. And it was all over the newspapers. Come see the engineering marvel. Come see this, come see that. But this was Ewa Mill under construction. Well, I've got some fantastic pictures of they're constructing Dry Dock 1. It's scary. I mean, everything is wooden jib booms and they're hauling huge amounts of weight. Okay, there it's essentially completed. One of the things that I wanted to be sure I saved this picture, that's the boxcar to the right, has a number on it. We have no good record of what these cars were numbered originally. And some of the original Carter cars, which had to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, later in life got renumbered, and some of them were in the 40s. So it's very hard to track down exactly the progression of what was going on with the railroad. A couple of dapper young guys there. Kind of right, kind of looks like Aaron. And the mill is finished. This is Kauila again, and she's on the mission to take people out to Ewa Mill. Ewa Mill obviously is in the background. To the left, that is a third-class passenger car again, but now it's been fancied up. It's got boards on the side. It could also be used as a freight car. You see that diagonal right there. It's actually a door, and the door could be opened. You could load sugar. You could, sacks of sugar or other freight inside. So it was actually a dual-purpose car. But they did dress it up with some siding. You notice there's some question as to when this picture was taken. It's a glass slide that I picked up from a guy in England. He says it's around 1898. I think it's a little bit earlier than that, but I'm not going to argue with him. There was a guy that was returning from his honeymoon trip to the Far East and took that photograph. Okay, Kauila and Leahi couldn't handle all the load as Ewa came online and as Oahu Sugar began to be built and the line was pushed out beyond Ewa toward Waianae. The ORNL ordered 2 Baldwin consolidations, consolidation being a 2-8-0 wheel arrangement. So there's 2 wheels up front on the pilot truck. There's 8 drivers, 4 per side, and no trailing truck. So at the time, these were the 2 largest engines on the ORNL. One was named Annexation, one was named Reciprocity. One carried the number 76, the other 98, to commemorate both by name and number. Dillingham always had good relations with the Crown. One of the reasons he was able to get his almost exclusive, or his exclusive charter to build the railroad, he was out of the country when Kalakaua was forced to sign the Bayonet Constitution. He returned, he was trying to get the charter. The foreign, so to speak, or the white legislators didn't want him to have an exclusive charter. The native legislatures, because he had not been involved in any of that political upheaval, actually pushed it through and carried the day for him to allow him to get the charter that he did. And eventually, this locomotive, the 280 configuration, was the most popular on the ORNL, and they had the most locomotives of this wheel arrangement. It's essentially a freight locomotive. The wheels are rather small in comparison to a high-speed locomotive, which has much larger wheels. The largest locomotives, and I don't know that I have a photograph of it on this particular bunch, was a 282 American locomotive, and they were comparable to the Denver Rio Grande Western K-28s, which is a very famous, everybody talks about the K-28s. It's a huge locomotive, and the ORNL had 4 of them. They were actually more powerful than the NRGW locomotives, because they were oil-fired.
These are using kiawe wood for fuel or
No, these were all coal-powered.
oil?
Coal originally, and then they started to convert to oil around 1905, 1906. And by 1912, they were all oil-fired.
What is the horsepower of this to compare it to?
I do not have that off the top of my head.
At least 2. Good guess.
The classification of locomotives aren't normally done in horsepower anyway. It's done by tractive effort. And the tractive effort is going to change by the number of wheels, the weight over the drivers, how the thing is designed. So normally when you talk about a steam locomotive, you're looking at the wheel arrangement, the cylinder size, whether it's a compound locomotive, you can have high and low pressure cylinders. It gets crazy. It's actually beyond actually what I'm comfortable talking about, unless I've got a set of notes in front of me. Okay, this is the line out to Ewa. You can see when I say that the railroad was very well maintained, that track bed is beautiful. The switches are actually flat and level. It's a very well maintained and constructed railroad. And that's probably about 1900.
That is sugarcane?
Yeah. Everything to the left there is sugarcane. We're not completely sure of where this picture was taken. We think it's Ewa, but there's not enough detail in the surrounding area that we can be certain.
So Joe, did they use local material for the ties, or did they import those?
Both.
Okay.
That goes into a whole nother railroad story over on Big Island and the mahogany, Hawaiian mahogany. They made ties for the Santa Fe and for the ORNL. Plus the ORNL imported quite a few of them. If you ever try to drive a spike into an Ohia tie, don't.
Drill a hole first.
You got to drill a hole first. Any guesses on where this is?
Sisal.
Nope. But the very fact that somebody knew there was a sisal is astounding. That's Waipahu. The station most everybody is familiar with in Waipahu wasn't built until 1911. But at this point, the railroad was doing very well financially and being extended toward Waianae. And Waipahu, again, this photograph is interesting, that this passenger car right here has a clear-story roof. So that flat section up on top actually had ventilation windows and screens. The two cars in front of it do not have that. Now, the ORNL started building their own cars about 1910. We have found no record of these cars being built without clear-story roofs, because every photograph that we have of the cars that we can identify by car number, year, etc., they all have clear-story roofs. So our supposition is that they were built this way and found to be unsatisfactory, and the roofs were replaced. But there is absolutely no record. It wasn't until 1921, when the commuter cars were being constructed, that this roof became prevalent again. Very unusual for a narrow gauge railroad. The ORNL had signals between Honolulu and Waipahu, and eventually from Waipahu up to Wahiawa. The signaling system was in general use on the mainland, but for a narrow gauge insular railroad like the ORNL, nobody bothered. Because the tempo of operations, especially during pineapple season and with the movement of sugar, it was so intense that the ORNL installed the signal system. Now, between Waipahu and Kahuku, this is all a single line railroad. There wasn't one way in, one way out. It's all on a single line. All the dispatching and everything was done by telephone. So all along the line, you had a mutual telephone connection, and each locomotive carried a portable telephone set. So if they got stopped someplace or they had a problem, they just go out, climb the pole, clamp onto the wires, and call home.
Did they have any mishaps, or there was a collision or something that motivated?
No. Fortunately, the ORNL did not have any, what we would refer to as a cornfield, head-on collisions. They did have accidents, they did have collisions. Pineapple Train lost control in 1921 coming down the Wahiawa branch, flipped over and killed a couple of guys. Usually, the trainmen that were injured or killed, it happened because they fell off. The cars would jerk and bang, and you weren't paying attention or holding on with at least one hand. You'd hit the ground and the train run over you. Out by the yard, this is a kind of a forgotten feature that was out there by Barber's Point. That's mooring mast. Now, this is 1925, and the spur to mooring mast was right in our yard. In fact, one of our guys started a fire over there one day inadvertently, and we found the actual ties that went to the mooring mast. This was built by the Navy for the Akron and the Akron, the two dirigibles that were meant to come to Hawaii, both of which unfortunately were lost before they ever got here. But in Ewa, there was quite a bit of activity. Not only the mill, but the Navy was also involved. And of course, later with Marine Corps Air Station Ewa, and then Barber's Point Naval Air Station.
So they built that and it never got used?
Never got used for its intended purpose, no. It became a radio tower later.
I think they had a balloon squadron. Yes.
They had a barrage balloons out here, I know. I don't know if they had the blimps or not. I would think they would have had, because you want to patrol off the coast, just kind of loiter. Blimps great for that. Okay, this is observation car number 64. And it's significant because it was built in the Honolulu shops down here by John Hughes in 1900. It was Dillingham's personal car. So when he went out on the line, or when he took dignitaries or guests out, they rode in this car. This is the car that you guys will ride in if you come out to ride in that given day. It has been restored. It's a most unusual car, and you guys may appreciate it even more than I do, being engineers. Normally, I keep forgetting at this thing, an observation car would start right about here, and this would be the platform. So right about where the rear wheels cross over. Almost a third of this car is observation platform. The structure underneath that looks like a bridge, which doesn't surprise me because John Hughes was originally worked for the San Francisco Bay Bridge Company. But somehow or other, he got to support it. The car was at Bishop Museum for years. It was at Ala Moana originally. Then it was transferred to Bishop Museum. Then it was transferred to us. A fellow named Dave Lomas spent about 8 years putting it back together again. It received regular maintenance consistently. Now you can see the little vents up on top. That was for the oil lights. They've since been replaced with electric.
That doesn't look like the car that I did the drawings for Kwana Nakola.
Yep, that's the one. We've had the side of it off. We had to replace some of the siding. So I finally was able to see some of the framing in there.
No, I remember going, trying to figure out the detailing for the artwork on the railing. That was an interesting exercise.
Ewa Mill here. There's now a street running through where the Ewa Mill Station was. Just to the right of this, there was a freight station, and I think that's in one of the next pictures. But the mill itself is to the left. So it wasn't too far from the mill, but it was generally behind the manager's house and the officer's row, which is still in existence. But it's more east of that, I guess, because the tracks actually get fairly close to the manager's house. If the Ewa Villages Historical Society is successful in getting the manager's house as a museum facility, I want to run a train from there to our yard and just shuttle back and forth. That's the garbage train. I just looked at the bottom part. You can see the back here, this is the end of the car. And then these are just all open gondolas. During the war, all the trash from Honolulu, because they couldn't burn it and give away a position, got loaded into specialized garbage cars and gondola cars and hauled out to Yokohama, and then was pushed off into a ravine. See, that's the freight shed I was speaking at Ewa. That's just the platform. We plan to build a replica of a freight shed, larger, more like the one in Waipahu, as our museum at Ewa. Okay, I mentioned the Mikados, the largest locomotives on the ORNL. This is one of them. It's a massive locomotive. That's number 80. She had a flat face, unlike the other ones that had a domed steam door, because she had been in a collision and the casting was broken, so they just put a flat piece of metal on it and sent her on her way. This is the junction between the ORNL main line on the left and the Ewa Plantation on the right. This is just down from our yard. When you come to the railroad, you come down Renton Road, you turn left and cross the tracks. That location is about 100 feet to your left. The hoops from the water tower used to be laying there for years, and we have no idea what happened to them.
That the water was to make steam?
Yes. Yep.
So the ones that had the fuel or oil, they were still making steam.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, the heat source was either wood originally, then they went to coal, and then they went to oil. And that's just a little further. This road running right here is HRS property, actually. So when you come down Renton and you turn, I want to make it a toll highway. We need the money. Okay, like any railroad in the 30s, the ORNL suffered by the automobile. The more automobiles became available, the more people didn't need the railroad. They didn't need to travel by train. So they built 2 motor cars. This one and M2, this is M1. M2 was also built by the ORNL. They had 2 gasoline engines. This is actually the engine compartment right here. There's one on both ends. And it was an electro-pneumatic control system. So the guys that operated these things had to be very skilled. And some of them were, and some of them, they broke it the first time out. But they were successful, and they built 2 more by converting some commuter coaches, but only with 1 engine, because they found that trying to synchronize the 2 was just too difficult. Okay, that's the replacement station that was built, still there. That's the one I guess you're working on now for the water leaks. Where it says Oahu Railway there, we were fortunate. We have recovered those letters. So when we do build our museum, those letters will be installed inside. We've also got a water fountain that I hope to install and make operational, and a couple other items that came directly out of the station. If you find anything else of interest, let me know. And the roundhouse. Since it's 1 o'clock, we'll just blow through these. Okay, this is number 85 with a train headed toward Barbers Point. And 85 is in our collection at the ORNL, at the Hawaiian Railway Society. There are only 3 ORNL steam engines left in the world, and we have all 3 of them. Kauila 6, 85, and number 12. Number 12 is of interest, as you see the shield on the headlight. That was dictated immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Originally, they were just blacked out completely, and then they finally allowed them this little shielded slit. So at least if you had an oncoming train, you could see it. And Waipahu had changed a bit between that earlier picture and this picture during the war. There were 3 water tanks here, the station, a large freight shed, and an engine shed. And number 22 there is peeling off the main line, heading up the Wahiawa branch. And 90 is waiting to go into the junction itself. Then we got to Nanakuli, and I think that's the last one.
Nanakuli. Yeah.
Yep, that's the Nanakuli Station.
All right, yeah, I don't know if Jeff's available to stick around after the meeting for discussion, but I think we'll wrap it up and give Jeff our round of applause. That was interesting stuff.
Engineers and architects of Hawaii welcome your comments on this program and any of our recent programs. We encourage your direct participation in this community outreach. So please email us your comments and ideas at eahawaii@gmail.com.